Iran just named Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia as its next targets. That's the claim moving fast right now, and I need you to understand why it's spreading. It's the perfect blend of fear and specificity. It doesn't say the West. It doesn't say tech. It says names you recognize, brands you use, companies that feel like the operating system of your life. So before you let that sentence turn into instant panic or instant dismissal, let's do this the useful way. In the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a clean framework to separate what's been reported from what's being implied, why these particular types of targets matter in modern conflict, and what signals to watch next that tell you whether this is mostly psychological warfare, mostly cyber escalation, or something that could spill into the physical world. And I'm going to give you the mini payoff right now so you don't have to wait for it. When a state starts talking about tech companies as legitimate targets, the real target isn't just buildings or servers. The real target is the nervous system, data, communications, finance, and perception. That's the point. Now let's build it carefully. First, what's actually been reported? Multiple reports say Iranian state-linked media, including the IRGC-affiliated Tasnim, published or circulated lists describing major U.S.-linked tech infrastructure, naming companies like Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia framed as potential targets, often focusing on offices, cloud infrastructure, and data centers in the Middle East, the New Republic. That's the first thing to notice. The framing is not just, "we hate Silicon Valley." It's very specifically about infrastructure and presence in the region, data centers, cloud hubs, and the physical footprint of digital services. Wired. Now here's the second thing to notice, and this is where people get tricked. Yet, a list in state-linked media is not the same thing as an operational plan you can bet your life on. But it's also not nothing. It's part threat, part messaging, part deterrence attempt, and part pressure campaign, aimed at shaping decisions without needing to fire a single shot. So the smarter question isn't, is this true? The smarter question is, what kind of move is this? Psychological, cyber, economic, or kinetic? Because targets can mean multiple kinds of targeting. Physical targeting, an actual strike on a facility. Cyber targeting, attacks on networks, identity systems, cloud services, or supply chains. Political targeting, pressuring Gulf states and companies hosting infrastructure. Economic targeting, threatening the systems behind banking, AI, payments, and logistics. And the internet mashes all of this into one scary sentence, so you'll assume the most cinematic version. Now let's talk about why these companies would be named at all, because this is the part that makes it make sense. When most people think of war, they think of soldiers and missiles. Modern war still includes those, but it also runs on something quieter: compute, cloud, satellites, logistics, and data. AI training, mapping, surveillance, secure communications, cyber defense, cloud hosting, intelligence workflows, decision support. So if you're Iran and you're trying to raise the cost of conflict for the US and its partners, going after military bases is the obvious route. But going after the systems that support modern operations, financial rails, cloud infrastructure, and data connectivity, can be a way to create leverage without fighting symmetrically. That's the logic behind why tech infrastructure starts showing up in threat messaging. Wired. And to be clear, I'm not saying these companies are doing anything illegal or that they are military. I'm saying that in a modern conflict, states increasingly argue that dual-use infrastructure, civilian tech that can support military workflows, counts as part of the battle space. Wired. Now here's where the story gets more serious, because there are two ways this can play out, and they're very different. One is the cyber way. Iran has a long history of cyber activity, and U.S. agencies have warned that Iranian-affiliated cyber actors and aligned groups may target vulnerable networks, often exploiting known vulnerabilities, weak passwords, or unpatched systems. See ISA. That matters because you don't have to strike a data center physically to create a shock headline. A major outage, a compromise, a leak, or a destructive cyber incident, especially if it hits high-profile brands, can create fear and uncertainty fast, and it's difficult for the public to verify details in real time. The other is the physical way. And this is where people either overreact or underreact. Overreact: World War III is here. Silicon Valley is getting bombed tomorrow. Underreact: it's just words. Nothing ever happens. The reality is in between. There have been reports and analysis suggesting that commercial data centers and cloud facilities in the Gulf have become part of the regional risk conversation, and that conflict conditions can threaten digital infrastructure, not only through direct strikes, but also through disruptions to connectivity like submarine cables and navigation interference. Rest of world. So if state-linked media is naming companies, it's not random. It's pointing at a real dependency. A lot of global tech infrastructure sits in a small number of physical places. That is both efficient and vulnerable. Now let me give you a simple framework to judge whether this is mostly propaganda or something that could translate into real consequences. Ask 3 questions. First, is this about naming or about capability? Anyone can name targets. Capability is what matters. Second, is this about pressure on decision makers or about a plan to cause damage? Threat messaging can be designed to scare companies into changing behavior, pulling staff, changing operations, leaning on governments. Third, is there any follow-through pattern? Threats become more serious when they come with a trail, prior attempts, consistent escalation, repeated probing, or credible indicators of preparation. Now, without getting lost in classified speculation, there are public clues you can watch. If companies start shifting to remote work in certain regional offices, if travel advisories change, if insurers adjust risk coverage, if cloud providers publish updates about regional resilience, those aren't proof of an attack plan, but they are signs that serious people are taking the risk environment seriously. And this is where the Nvidia mention is interesting, because it tells you the messaging isn't only about cloud, it's also about the AI stack. Nvidia isn't a cloud provider in the same way Google and Microsoft are. Nvidia is the backbone of AI compute and a symbol of the AI era. So naming Nvidia is as much symbolic as it is practical. It's a way of saying, we can target the systems powering the modern world. That's a perception strike. Now, here's the part most people will miss. If Iran is talking about tech companies, the most likely near-term impact isn't that your Gmail stops working tomorrow. The most likely near-term impact is a shift in risk posture, cybersecurity tightening, physical security hardening, and increased anxiety in the Gulf about hosting high-profile foreign infrastructure, because naming targets is also a message to host countries. These facilities on your soil could put you in the blast radius. That's leverage. Now let's talk about why this is a viral story, because understanding the psychology helps you resist it. This headline works because it collapses distance. Most Americans hear Middle East conflict, and it feels far away. But Google, Microsoft, Nvidia feels like home. It feels like your laptop. It feels like your job. It feels like your accounts. So even if the risk is primarily regional, the emotional impact is global. And that emotional impact is the point of naming big brands. Now, I want to be careful here because there's a line we don't cross. I'm not going to tell anyone how to attack anything. I'm not going to speculate about specific facilities or methods. What I can do is tell you what this kind of threat messaging tends to mean in modern conflicts. It usually signals one or more of the following. 1. An intention to expand the definition of legitimate targets beyond traditional military sites. 2. An attempt to deter by raising economic and political cost. 3. An effort to push fear into corporate decision-making. 4. A potential warning shot for cyber escalation, because cyber is the lowest cost way to create high-profile disruption. And again, we have official U.S. guidance warning that Iranian cyber actors and affiliated groups may exploit vulnerabilities and target networks, which is relevant whenever tensions spike. CISA. Now, let's ground this into 3 realistic paths forward, because people always want one story, and one story is how you get surprised. Path 1. It's mostly psychological warfare. Names get published. The story goes viral. Companies tighten posture. But nothing dramatic happens immediately. The objective is pressure. Make the U.S. and partners feel the cost. Make corporations lobby for restraint. And make host countries nervous. Path 2. Cyber escalation becomes the main battlefield. You see more phishing, more ransomware-style disruption from aligned groups, more attempts to compromise accounts, and more hacktivist noise designed to make it look like chaos. This is the path where you can get real disruption without a single physical strike, because cyber lives in the gray zone and moves fast. Path 3. Limited physical incidents tied to regional infrastructure. Not Silicon Valley gets bombed. More like a regional facility, a local office, or a shared infrastructure node gets threatened or disrupted, and it becomes a global business story because it touches cloud availability, finance, or connectivity. This is where the rest-of-world-style concern comes in. The Gulf has become a major AI infrastructure hub, and undersea cables and choke points create concentrated vulnerability. Rest of world. Now, which path is most likely in the next few days? I can't promise you a timeline. Nobody honest can. But the pattern in modern conflict is that cyber and psychological operations are the easiest levers to pull quickly, while physical escalation carries higher political and military risk. So if you want to stay informed without getting hijacked, watch for these signals. Do credible outlets converge on concrete follow-through, or does the story remain mostly a repeating claim? Do cybersecurity agencies issue new guidance or warnings? Do companies themselves acknowledge elevated threat posture? Do we see disruptions to digital infrastructure in the region? Connectivity, data centers, navigation interference being reported consistently? And on that last point, there have already been reports about GNSS interference and complicated navigation environments in and around Hormuz during conflict periods, which shows how digital friction can become part of regional pressure. CISA. Now, let's talk about the one mistake people make with a headline like this, and I'm going to say it clean. They treat a threat as a forecast. A threat is not a forecast. A threat is a tool. Sometimes it's bluff. Sometimes it's deterrence. Sometimes it's a setup. Sometimes it's a signal. But if you take every threat as a guaranteed prediction, you become emotionally controllable. And that's the entire point of threat messaging: to control behavior without needing to act. So here's the discipline. Treat it as real enough to respect, meaning you don't dismiss it, but not real enough to spread as confirmed inevitability, meaning you don't amplify it as it's happening. If you're an everyday person, that means you don't let the headline rent space in your nervous system. If you're in a business, that means you tighten cyber hygiene and crisis planning, patching, access control, incident response readiness, because those steps reduce risk from any actor, not just Iran. And this aligns with the general guidance in U.S. cyber advisories about Iranian-linked actors exploiting basic weaknesses. CISA. Now, I'll end with the real takeaway. This isn't just about Iran and 3 companies. This is about a shift in what targets mean in modern conflict. The battlefield increasingly includes cloud, connectivity, finance, and AI infrastructure, because that's where power lives now. So if you want to be ahead of the noise, don't obsess over the scariest sentence. Watch the direction. The war is expanding into systems, not just sites. Now I want your take. Do you think this is primarily a cyber and psychological pressure campaign, naming big brands to create fear and leverage? Or do you think we're entering a phase where physical infrastructure tied to global tech becomes a more frequent part of the conflict environment? Drop your answer in the comments or in the